Hey everyone, welcome to day 5 of Liquidity 2020. This is Shinju with Dystopia Labs. We're really excited to have Ken from Electric Capital. He'll be doing a talk on de-risking DeFi with guarded launches. And I'll let him take it from here.
Thanks. Hi everyone. Thanks for joining me in the morning. I'm happy to be able to help kick this thing off last day. My name is Ken. Like she mentioned, I'm a member of the investment team at Electric Capital. Prior to sort of getting into investing, I spent most of my adult life working on eng teams at companies like VMware and Facebook. Both of these companies, they have these kind of huge engineering problems where, with VMware, we're building mission critical software for large enterprises. And with Facebook, you're launching features every day, every week to billions of active users. And so this guarded launches is really coming out of, me thinking about, how dApps and DeFi is being developed, and what are some of the techniques and strategies that we can take from these world-class engineering teams and make our lives a little easier. And there's sort of maybe the first question that comes to mind is, why do we need to think about this anyway? Isn't this just like any other kind of coding? And so, I want to first maybe impress upon you that actually writing DeFi apps is quite difficult. If you look at, this is just since the sort of beginning of DeFi, if you want to call it that, maybe around 2018. I just kind of added up all the things that we've seen, all the types of exploits we've seen, and it really is starting to become a big number, $60 million worth of assets. Thankfully, some of these were returned, and there's a bunch of interesting stories behind all of these things. But this number is real, and this is a risk that any new DeFi developer feels, or should be feeling if you're getting into the space. So it is a real problem that we need to address. And what's really kind of driving this risk? Well, on the one hand, we have an explosion of DeFi and Ethereum developers. This is just from some of the internal data that we have at Electric. And then this graph on the right, if you've been in DeFi, you've seen this kind of float around. But DeFi protocols are highly related to each other, highly interconnected. And from a programming perspective and a risk perspective, this means that even something that feels like its own product has all these complex interactions with everything else that's out there, which makes it very difficult to actually identify all the risks and potential problems ahead of time. And so this generally leads to more complexity and just a greater probability of something being misdesigned or unanticipated and problems arising. Building DeFi is actually uniquely challenging. I thought about this kind of in the framework of like all the other types of systems I worked on. For one thing, you have kind of hundreds of decentralized teams actually working on what amounts to a shared code base. And these aren't independent products. These are all products that can call into each other's code and do funny things. And generally, we've seen this in open source before, but in those communities, there's often sort of this benevolent dictator for life, they call them, that kind of establishes standards and tries to keep a certain amount of safety in the system, at least in the well-run communities. And it's striking that crypto actually doesn't really have this. The whole point of it is to be decentralized and permissionless, and so we don't have that mechanism per se. In addition to that, real dollars or dollars or yen or Bitcoin or Ethereum are on the line from day one. So that this isn't this, not only you're putting your users' funds at risk potentially, but you're also giving potential hackers or folks that would want to exploit your system financial incentive from the very first day to try to attack your system. And then, as we all know, with blockchain, there's no clawbacks or rollbacks or do-overs here. If you think about it, a lot of the traditional financial system, the risk is mitigated because there are these ways to undo bad transactions in hindsight, and we don't have any of that here. It's also kind of difficult and costly to actually upgrade code. That's sort of an odd statement, especially in the world of Web 2, where people are pushing code every day on blockchains and smart contracts. Everything from the gas that it requires to update things, the complex designs it requires to have proxy contracts and things like that, down to the audit cost of new code. Everything is way more expensive, and so you really have to think about that. And I think the last point here is just that the dev tools in this space are early. I fully expect things like kind of formal verification and some of these techniques to mature in this space. But as of today, there's some teams doing it, but I think the dev tools in general leave it mostly up to the developers to figure this stuff out. Cool. So what are guarded launches? The core idea is actually quite simple. The idea is to sort of manage your risk by starting small. And what does that mean? So the idea here is that kind of this crawl, walk, run kind of idea. When we build these systems, we can actually put in all kinds of limits that really reduce this risk, and everything from like limiting just the total number of assets that your system is willing to sort of take on, the types of assets, and you might do this on a per user basis or some kind of like rate limit. Some of the more advanced things might look like trying to limit some of the composability so that you don't get like flash loan based exploits coming at you from day one. You can limit sort of the inflow and outflow using some escrows and time locks. Some protocols even are starting to build in insurance pools, and so you might think about how the amount of assets that you're willing to take on in your system might be a function of the size of the insurance pool, and how that ratio may change over time. Collateral ratios, we saw that from the beginning with Maker and synthetics, taking on sort of interesting ratios to limit their risk. And then, you see traditional exchanges and things kind of do some of this stuff where if for whatever reason there's some really unusual scenario that's hit, there's still a way to really shut things down. And so that might be in an automated way through a circuit breaker, or you might have some manual switch, kill switch that either can pause or shut down a system when exploits are detected. So there's probably hundreds of ways to do this. I think we're still discovering the best ways. But the idea here is to like think about how these fit into your process. People often say like building crypto and building dApps are sort of like designing rocket ships or airplanes. So I just wanted to point out the fact that an actual company that's actually building a supersonic jet is doing basically the same thing. These guys have been in the news recently. They just announced their prototype supersonic jet, the first thing of its type that's been built in like decades. But as you see down at the bottom here, we're looking at a scaled down version where literally only the pilot can sit in there. And this lets them both limit kind of their investment to figure out whether this thing works or not, but also they're not flying around with passengers from day one, putting them at risk. And so if this is really like building planes or rockets, then there's something to learn from with how these guys actually do it. And thinking about how this fits actually into the launch process. So today, and thankfully this is changing a little bit relative to when I put this original post out, but mostly what you see today is kind of this build and test and audit process before a protocol is launched, and then when it's ready to go, it gets put up on the blockchain, and the website gets launched, and we kind of see what happens. And obviously that a lot of things can go wrong there, and hopefully my kind of first slide was able to impress that a lot of things do actually go wrong there. With guarded launches, this process looks a little bit different. So, the beginning of the process, obviously, we have to build and test any protocol or product in the way that we usually do, and run it through audits. But then instead of just launching it out, into the world, we actually launch it in this limited way with a bunch of limits in place. Then we actually use governance to manage those limits as either it could actually be like a core team of developers, or it could be like a fully community-based DAO. There's a bunch of different ways you can do that. But the idea is that there's some set of folks watching over this, building confidence over time as this thing lives in the real world with real assets put against it. Building that confidence, and then eventually tweaking those limits so that the product can achieve scale. And the nice thing here is that scaling these products isn't rebuilding a new airplane. And building a larger airplane. It's just usually changing configuration parameters. So that part is easy because we're talking about software. Cool. New projects are starting to use this stuff, and so this is just a sampling of from Twitter that I found. I think the limits that we're starting to see are still kind of in the early days. So we see per address limits, so per wallet limits. You might have a deposit limit that you can do with any particular user. Total TVL limits. So if it's some kind of system that is pooling assets, some limit on what the total amount of assets that can be pooled are. And then highly related to that is sort of a debt limit. So if it's a system that issues some kind of debt or synthetic asset or anything like that, then you can put limits around that, which is a little bit different than TVL. So I wanted to spend a little bit of time talking about where things go, where I think things go from here, and I'll sort of have three categories to talk about. One is sort of shared infrastructure for guarded launches, and what we might be able to do there. Second is sort of an emergence of kind of advanced insurance and risk management tools. And then third is sort of, how we might be able to leverage kind of established DeFi user communities in order to be able to do some of these safer launches. So let's talk about how shared infra might help. So this is a poster that I stole from from a Facebook presentation. I think these posters are all over the place if you ever visit the Facebook campus. But this one really kind of strikes true, in this particular topic, is that the better infra that you have, and I think most developers understand this, the better infra that you have, it allows everyone building on top to move faster. And so I think this really applies to guarded launches. Today, these teams that I mentioned that are doing guard launches are basically figuring out on their own how to do these limits. There seems no reason to me why we couldn't be able to build sort of common building blocks around this stuff. And we're already doing it for governance. We're obviously doing it for the actual financial primitives themselves. So doing it around some of these limits and controls makes sense. This allows the community to actually focus all the auditing and testing energy around a small set of things that then can be leveraged to protect basically everything out there. This really kind of multiplies the value, and hopefully will make auditing actually easier and cheaper going forward. And like I mentioned, once you have this, then new projects and new devs can actually move really quickly, faster than they could before, because a lot of this stuff is kind of taken care of, and they have a platform that actually protects them and their users from the get-go. Another thing that happens when you sort of build some of these frameworks and shared pieces is that it actually codifies the best practices for building this stuff. So it's an early industry. People are figuring this stuff out, but as the tooling gets better, hopefully in a year or two or three, when a new developer is saying, oh, I want to build this new DeFi thing, there's a clear set of things that, okay, we use this, we use this kind of governance, we use this kind of guarded launch infra, and that actually forces them to think about all the different pieces that they might need to think about when deploying these systems, and that will be good for the ecosystem overall. And then the last thing I'm sort of, that gets me kind of excited to think about is how can third parties actually verify that a new project is using any of these safeguards. I think this is a really important thing when we talk about the next million, the next 10 million, DeFi users. They're not going to come, there's an attitude, I think, right now in some projects where like, well, it's, users assume their own risk. It's up to them to audit the code, which is great when it's, a few thousand developers kind of all sitting on crypto Twitter and talking to each other. And when the next million people come in, they're not going to do that. We all know they're not going to do that. And so that we need to figure out ways in which the community or maybe there's some small set of like trusted rating agencies or whatever develops here, they need to be able to actually look at this stuff and say, okay, this new project is actually using these safeguards. As a new user, you're going to be protected because these limits are in place. And so having some shared pieces that can easily be identified, it will be a great way, I think will be a great help in sort of achieving this goal. But next, let's talk about insurance a little bit. So, this is an interesting space. There's a lot of new kind of insurance and risk management tools that are coming up in DeFi. It's interesting because there's I think even from the early DeFi, if you look at even something like Maker, Maker sort of has this insurance type system built in with the MKR token. But I think what really needs to happen is we really need to formalize the relationship between some of these different mechanisms that we see. So everything from these in protocol insurance pools. So some protocols actually fund an insurance pool that protects any losses. From that to governance token staking. So this might be sort of Maker or some newer protocols that are actually Maker plus staking to put the actual tokens at risk and figure out who actually benefits from both providing the insurance and taking the loss. And then some of these external insurance markets, Nexus and some of these things are starting to develop. And so we're starting to get an interesting tool set, and I think this actually really meaningfully changes what a potential guarded launch looks like. You could imagine, in addition to all these limits, a protocol actually integrating directly with insurance Legos to say, okay, you can actually engage with this thing in a way that's automatically insured, based on some market pricing of what insurance for that protocol may look like. And this is not to go down the centralization route here, but I think it's really interesting to think about, what the FDIC of DeFi might look like. Will the next million users be able to come into DeFi and say, well, if I put in some amount less than, let's say, 50 grand, that I can understand that my deposits will be protected by some insurance system that is built in. Cool. And then the last sort of area, I think this is kind of a new emerging trend that I see, is that DeFi is sort of not this completely new thing anymore. We saw this kind of with Uniswap and the Uni airdrop. There's actually a community of users out there, and I think this is something that new projects can really start to leverage, and it's a luxury that new projects have that previous projects may not have had before. So the idea here is that you can actually look on chain and figure out which addresses, which wallets, which users have been participating in DeFi. And you can probably look at some of that behavior and try to decide, are these good users to have in my system? And based on that, you can actually build, some gated access to very early versions of your software based on some of these user profiles. And this is not totally unlike what happens in the real world. If you think about Facebook, for example, at the beginning it was college students, and so unless you had an edu email address, you couldn't get in. And if you think about it, that makes it hard for the Russian bots to get in, or anyone else who might want to try to exploit your system. And so I think there's a real corollary for DeFi here, and we're just starting to see the beginnings of this kind of approach. And by doing this, the other interesting thing is that if you think about a per user kind of limit that you might be able to implement in a fairly straightforward way, that those always have sort of this Sybil attack problem. Someone can go and create 1,000 wallets and try to get around some of that. If we actually start to look at on-chain records of addresses and stuff, then those are by definition very difficult to Sybil attack. If you had to have farmed Uni some time ago to be able to get access to your system, then you will that's not something that you can just clone 1,000 times and get into something. So those are sort of the three areas that I'm excited about. Obviously, there's a bunch more. Happy to always explore new things with people. Just wanted to give a quick thanks. Thank you to the summit and the organizers. Let me chat about this. There's a sort of a more in-depth article up on our Medium. You can see the link there. There's a bunch of other articles that we write, as sort of investors and builders in the space that might be of interest. The last thing I'll point out is always happy to, if you're a team kind of working on this stuff and you sort of want to talk through some potential design ideas, I am technically on the investing side today, but there's sort of a part of my brain that always gets very engaged with sort of building and designing things. And so, if you need someone to sort of bounce some ideas off or chat through some of these things, I'm always happy to sort of get in touch and help be a sounding board for some of these issues. So it's my contact information there. And that's all I had. Happy to take any questions if there are any.
Hey guys, do you have any questions for Electric? Okay, I have one. So regarding guarded launches, when you
Yeah.
have talked about it with other people, what are some common misconceptions or like things people ask about regarding it?
Yeah, so I think the gut reaction. Let me go back to sort of this slide. The gut reaction often is that people think of this as like a central developer team having control over a protocol, and that sort of flies in the face of potentially like a DAO style approach where the goal is to really get something out into the control of the community. But I think that's a little bit misguided in the sense that like you can still like these goals are not incompatible with each other. You can still get to scale in a risk managed way and get to sort of full decentralization if that's your goal. It's just a matter of sequencing, and so I think it's difficult sometimes to say, oh well, we're going to be fully decentralized from the get go, and it's just buyer beware from the very start of it. I think that's a strategy that may actually make it more difficult for a project to succeed compared to something that even if it's a small central team controlling things in the beginning, some project that has a history of managing risk and sort of builds a culture of doing that from the early days of the project has a better chance of lasting in the long run and growing to scale.
For this launch process, does it also tie into token distribution strategies post launch? Since with fair launch and everything, everyone is we're projects are still mainly distributing their tokens upon launch. Have you seen any projects actually strategically plan to hold out tokens past launch to some specific milestone to distribute at a later date? So that way
Yeah.
they have more optionality
Yeah,
if
no,
shit goes
totally.
wrong.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a very interesting debate, and probably this was covered in some of the other conversations. But I think some of the like the liquidity mining stuff and the token mission stuff we're seeing today is kind of simplistic, if you want to call it that.
Yeah.
And there are reasons to do it that way. So I'm not trying to deride anything, but I think in the future, we will have to be more thoughtful about how we sort of spend some of these governance tokens in terms of driving some of the behaviors that people are looking to drive, and for sure, like integrating with sort of some of these guarded launch strategies is going to be a big part. I mean, it doesn't make sense, if you have limited access to a product and you're doing very aggressive liquidity mining in the beginning, then that's not going to look good from a community perspective for sure. I would say there are some interesting experiments that I'm aware of. ArcX is sort of one of them that sort of has almost gamified some of the early liquidity mining stuff, and there's sort of this combination of trying to hit certain milestones and that unlocking a next set of tokens, and so that's kind of an interesting pattern that we've seen, and I've kind of spent a bit of time with the founder there thinking through some of these ideas. So yeah, I think there's going to be a lot of creativity here going forward, and there's a bunch of interesting ways to do it.
Cool. So some questions have come in.
Yeah. How do you think about teams that have to balance increasing volume to their protocol with managing risk? Yeah. So I mean, I think that's ultimately the question. there's sort of different phases, I would say. Uh, Definitely in those, unfortunately, we've kind of, if you think about how long it took Bitcoin to like get out into the world and really be trusted, I mean, this is a decade-long process. So, I think unfortunately, like there's been some expectation and some unreasonable expectation created, especially in DeFi land, where these things should launch and immediately hit scale. I think that's an unhealthy expectation, and it creates kind of really risky behavior. And so, you know, um, I think it is true that if you're sort of launching in today's environment, there is some expectations that you have to battle with. But on the flip side, I do think as time goes on and things get even more complicated, we're going to see even bigger and bigger exploits. And so you can choose to sort of live on that edge and take that risk, or I think the more prudent approach is to figure out what kind of limits that you're willing to live with, that they can still demonstrate that you ultimately want to prove that your product has product market fit, your protocol has product market fit, and that you can scale it as soon as you have that. But I don't think you need to put $1 billion on the line right at the beginning to show that the thing works. And so there definitely is a balance there. One other thing that I sort of didn't mention here is that uh, one of the things that I've seen teams do around this is that when you have these limits in place, when you actually go and change these limits because you've got more audits, or you've been running for a while and you think you have more confidence in the system, that can actually be kind of good PR in and of itself. So it both sort of emphasizes the culture of like risk management, but also kind of gives people a sense of momentum and growth in a way that just throwing something out there from the beginning might not be able to do. Let's see. I see a question about Acropolis. I'm not sure if there's some particular set of things that they did uh, in when you're referring to subsequent moves. So I'm not sure how to comment on that one. Potential. So I'm not familiar with the SDG linked, what that is. Could you provide some details? Might be able to answer a question. Oh, here's another question coming in here. Okay, it's the same.
So regarding guarded launches, is there any information on regulatory risk and how they can diminish it by launching a specific way?
Yeah, that's a great question. I don't. Obviously, I'm not a lawyer, so I'll caveat everything with that. I do think, unfortunately, I think a lot of the classifications on the regulatory side tend to be, you're either your other money service businesses or you're not, or you're either a money transmitter or you're not. It's sort of, at the end of the day, it doesn't really matter if you launched it in a particular way or not in terms of risk management. But I do think in sort of a lot of these gray areas, my understanding with regulators and sort of enforcement actions, that like intent and kind of intent and how careful you are actually does play a role in some of those things. And so to the extent that I think this can sort of demonstrate that you're not just out to rug pull someone, can help for sure.
Okay, awesome. Yeah, so this was really great. Do you have any closing thoughts?
No, like I said, if you're out there, if you're a builder out there, and want to talk through some ideas, I'm always happy. Just reach out on Twitter or Telegram or email.
Awesome. Thanks, Ken. This
Yeah,
was really great. We're going to transition to our next talk now, which is with Gitcoin. Thanks so much.
yeah. Thank you. Bye, everyone.